Mr. Huw Irranca-Davies, who has responsibility, and it's a fairly recent addition to his portfolio, responsibility for older people, as well as younger people and social care. So a little word about Huw. He's worked in public and private sector management, senior lecturer in higher education before entering politics. In 2002 he was elected as the Labour MP for Ogmore, which he held until 2016, not very long ago. So now he is the AM for Ogmore. So he's a member of the Welsh Assembly. He is very much part of the Welsh Government with a very senior brief, which is absolutely relevant to this audience. I'm very pleased to say that I was in the Welsh Assembly when that announcement was made by the First Minister, Carwyn Jones. I hope it didn't come as a surprise to you, Huw, that you were being given some extra work, but it's really important work, and we're very pleased to see you here today. I think you said earlier this might be your first time in the gardens, but you have been to Carmarthenshire a number of times. So give a very warm welcome to Huw Irranca-Davies.
Thank you, Peter. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Prynawn da I chi gyd. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's lovely to be here with you. Always a delight to come into Carmarthen. It isn't the first time I've been to the gardens. It's the second time. When I first came here, it was actually when it had started and things were hardly growing. I'm not sure if I'll have time today to actually go and look around, but if not, I'll have to come back there. Is it worth coming back to look around? Yeah. Right, okay, that's a date in my diary now. Is the autumn a good time? Good, yeah, okay, well, I will be back then with my wife then to have a look down. But I only want to say a few words to you this afternoon, and it's a delight to be with you. It's always a delight to be with you. It's at such a gathering of so many people as well, and with such an important forum. And I want to focus this afternoon on something which is of increasing concern to Welsh Government, but also throughout society, and I know through your agenda today to you as well, and everybody gathered here. And that is the issues of loneliness and isolation, and the detrimental effect that you'll have heard today that they can have on everybody, on individuals, but also on families as well, and also on communities. Now, we know, you'll have heard today, that loneliness and isolation can lead to physical ill health as well, and by the same token, people who are experiencing poor health themselves can often find themselves, who are in receipt of care and support, can often find themselves drifting into loneliness and isolation as well. They're more likely to find themselves drifting into loneliness and isolation. And sometimes they say in politics that all politics is personal. It is. It's what we see. I think often people think that politicians float in this high cloud. I was conscious of when we came in there, we drove in there in the ministerial car, we crunched up on the gravel, disrupted proceedings entirely, and so on. But it's often thought that ministers float around in this bubble of helicopters and so on. I don't have a helicopter, by the way. But actually, we live and breathe in communities with families with some of the same challenges and meeting many of the same people. And the reality of loneliness and isolation came home to me very vividly, and I've told people this story before. Some years ago at an election, we knock on a lot of doors at elections, and I was knocking on a door in a local community very close to mine, and they were single-storey bungalows where a lot of older people lived too, and they loved to live there as well. There was quite a waiting list to get into these bungalows. And I knocked on a door there after, it was a bright sunny day, there was a lot of smiling faces and so on, and then I knocked on this one door, and the chap who came to the door, who I sort of recognised, because we're small communities, we know everybody, but I hadn't seen him for a long time. And his opening words to me were, "Huw, I'm so glad you've knocked. I've not spoken to anybody for a couple of years. I am deeply sad." He told me in his opening words that he was sad, he was lonely. He wasn't somebody that had connection with any services, any need to draw down any services. He didn't have a social worker, he didn't have any care or support. He wasn't physically infirm or didn't need any of that sort of support. What had happened to him is that he'd had a bereavement a couple of years before. His wife had passed away, and he just locked himself away and shut down. He was feeding himself, he was looking after himself in a basic sort of way, but he was deeply sad and lonely. And what that brought home to me was there's an immense amount of work that we can do, not just in statutory services and third sector and so on, but actually as good neighbours and good communities and those connected communities. So I want to touch on some parts of that. And it takes me back actually to when I was a kid. It quite intrigued me that when you're a child you don't understand a lot of things going on. But in the place we lived in Gowerton, every Sunday when we made Sunday dinner, my mum would always scoot off shortly before she'd laid out the dinner for us with it plated up. In the days before there was microfilm and so on, so it'd be covered in tin foil, and she'd nip across the road to a house opposite, semi-detached house, and she was taking dinner over, and Dad would nip over with her as well. And it's only these years later I realised what was happening. Again, it was an issue with somebody who was a widower, and it wasn't the fact of pity or anything like that. It was being good neighbours, and it wasn't the fact of actually taking a Sunday dinner. It was the chat and the conversation and the, how are you? How are things going? And I know years later on how much that meant to that guy in that house there. So there's something within this that is beyond the reach of things that Welsh Government can do, local government can do, statutory services. It's something about how we look after each other. And I'm not doing this in a preachy way. It's a very fundamental thing that all of us have got something, I think, that we can contribute to better communities, better societies, and making them that way. But I'm going to touch on some Welsh Government things as well then. We know that not everybody in our communities feels this sense of connection. We see it around us. So instead, a bit like the elderly gentleman, the chap I recognised, when I knocked on his door, people can feel lonely and isolated. Now, as some of you will know, the Assembly's Health and Social Services and Sport Committee, who scrutinise us in government, they undertook a valuable inquiry into loneliness and social isolation last year. It looked at the experiences of the older population in Wales, and I should say, as I say, of the older population in Wales, I hold myself in that category now as well. I am genuinely a greybeard in politics. The issues that the committee raised will no doubt be familiar to many of you. Things like, really practical things like the availability of transport, the pros and cons of digital technologies. Often we talk about digital technologies as if that's not something that's relevant to the older population. We know actually that it is vitally important to the older members of our community. And in fact, I see it again with my own family, how advanced members of my older part of the family are, partly because they engage with younger members of the family as well. But that connectivity through digital is increasingly as important as physical connectivity through bus routes and so on. The benefits of having good quality housing was raised by the committee as well, and good quality housing in the right place, in the right sort of communities, in safe and attractive neighbourhoods. All of these things help address issues of loneliness and isolation and many more. And it also highlighted the importance of intervening early on. This is a theme through Welsh Government and everything that we do. Early intervention saves costs and ultimately saves lives further down the lines as well. It prevents needs from escalating. It recognises trigger points in people's lives which can lead to loneliness and isolation. And again, some of these trigger points will be familiar to you sitting here today. Indeed, I noticed when reading through the results of your 2017 survey that over 25%, 27% of you saw bereavement as being the main cause of loneliness or isolation. And that was followed by family members not living locally, or having no family, or insufficient transport, or illness or disability. These will be familiar to you. So if we're fortunate, if we're lucky, then we have family and friends living around us, who pop in, who say hello, who support us, who, are just good neighbours and good friends and good family. But we also know that at difficult times, local services can help people to re-engage with their communities and prevent these feelings of loneliness and isolation from becoming long-lasting and embedded. So one of the things we need to do is to make sure that people know that these services exist and also how to access them. I take you back to that situation with that elderly gentleman on the doorstep when he opened the door to me. He didn't only not know that services exist, he didn't have a clue how to access them, and nobody was there to help him in doing that. Now, there's a growing body of evidence to show that loneliness and isolation, I have to say, are not just issues for older people. As you rightly said, Peter, I recently took on the extended title of Minister for Older People. I'm also the Minister for Children and Young People, and also for Social Care. It strands all ages and all demographics. You can be lonely and isolated when you are surrounded by people. When you are living in densely populated areas, you can be lonely and isolated, and you can be young as well. My former colleague, Joe Cox, the former MP for Batley and Spen, said, quite rightly, young or old, loneliness does not discriminate. And in the last few years, loneliness and isolation have featured, of course, in your Forum's annual survey, which I just touched on. But it was only back in 2016-17 that loneliness was included in the National Survey for Wales. That was an important point because it showed us that just under 17% of people in Wales felt lonely, and just over 50% had experienced at some time feelings of loneliness. And perhaps one of the most startling findings was that younger people were more likely to be lonely than older people. Just think of that. How is that happening? So the Welsh Government's programme for government, called Taking Wales Forward, includes a commitment to develop a national cross-government strategy to address loneliness and isolation. Given what we now know, we've committed to producing a strategy which covers all ages, young and old. And I say cross-government as well because that's important, because combating these issues will involve discussions with people, with colleagues, in transport, in housing, and in health, and in all other departments right across government. If it's for one minister to deliver in one department, it'll end up being a silo. This has to touch all aspects of the way we deliver public services and good communities. And at a national level, I believe it is the Welsh Government's responsibility to ensure that the statutory sector, the third sector and the private sectors work with local communities to create a really joined up set of solutions to tackle loneliness and isolation. And this is important because I have to say, neither the Welsh Government nor any one single agency, including some of the excellent agencies here today that are doing workshops that you will hear from, no one of them can address this issue on its own. The only way to tackle the wide-ranging and deep-rooted impacts of loneliness and isolation is to bring together all those agencies, all those people who can have an influence to address the causes and the wider harmful effects for the individual and for communities. So as a government, our vision is to enable people to create strong, resilient communities which unite people's strengths and draw those strengths together. So next month, we're going to be asking people for their views on how to achieve this vision. What are your practical ideas? How do we do this? Because you are the ones with the ideas that can help us. When our final strategy is published, which will be around March next year, I want it to be clear and practical. I want it to be comprehensive, bringing all these aspects together, and an informed response, informed by you, on our response to loneliness and isolation in Wales. So I really hope that you, either as a forum or individually, as organisations or as individual people here today, will input into your ideas for that vision and that strategy. However, we're not waiting for that, and I've made this clear repeatedly. There's much that we're doing already to alleviate loneliness and isolation. First of all, our national strategy, which some of you may have heard of, it's called Prosperity for All. It commits us to supporting everyone to live healthy and prosperous and rewarding lives. So the Ageing Well in Wales grant is strongly associated with the strategy's healthy and active chapter. So it promotes activities, some of which you'll see today. Activities such as Nordic walking or Tai Chi or arts and creativity. And we're also funding befriending services, peer support services, digital connectivity programs, sensory impairment services, and home safety checks, and so on and so on. We're not waiting to get on with the strategy. And I was very pleased to be invited to speak alongside the Older People's Commissioner for Wales, who took up post just last month. To mark her first day in office, the Commissioner set out her ambition to make Wales the best place in the world to grow older. And I really welcome and commend this ambition. It's an ambition that we share in Welsh Government. And let me just say straight off, and I say this repeatedly wherever I go, by volunteering, by caring for loved ones, or by being a valued member of their local community, older people form the backbone of our society. They're not a burden, they're the thing that holds our society together. So to make Wales the best place to grow older, we've got to move away from negative stereotypes of ageing and embrace the opportunities and the challenges that growing older brings. And that's why the Welsh Government is currently renewing its focus on older people by undertaking a new programme of work building on phase 3 of the strategy for older people. We're closely working now with older people and their organisations to identify the key areas where change is needed. And the work spans a broad range of areas. So, for example, issues around local transport services, community facilities such as public toilets, and libraries, for example, the difference that these can make to a real quality of life. These are the building blocks to help create and sustain vibrant, cohesive communities which support everyone to age well within Wales. Now, I want to ensure, and that's my commitment as a minister, is to ensure that all older people enjoy a life that has value and meaning and purpose. So I want to thank our new Older Persons Commissioner for setting the ambition and the bar so high. And I look forward to working with the Older Persons Commissioner, and I have to say with you, and older people right across Wales, to ensure our own nation really does become the very best place in the world to grow older. So diolch yn fawr iawn am y gwahoddiad yma heddiw, a diolch yn fawr iawn am gwrando I fi hefyd. Thank you so much for listening to me and for the invitation here today. It's been a delight just to share a few words with you, and I wish you well for the rest of the day. And I'm going to find the opportunity to come back as well and see the gardens in their splendour. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd.
Well, I'm sure you will agree with me that that was a very excellent address, and it covered so many of the themes that are important to us that we've talked about already today. But also I would like to say, and I'm very pleased that Huw gave me the opening survey. He mentioned survey 17, which is the survey that you would have filled in last year. Now there is a new one, number 18, and that asks lots of important questions about dementia, about loneliness, about isolation, about libraries, community services, digital, and so on and so on. So if you feel empowered after today and you feel I need to express my voice in terms of some of those issues, many of those issues that we've talked about today are part of that survey. You can complete it in paper form. You can also complete it, and we would encourage this online, and again reference to digital and the value of digital communication. Some of us work very closely in that field of digital experience and helping to get older people online. I'm part of that personally. And certainly it's my experience that more and more older people want to go digital. It's quite a challenge, but we have 90-year-olds who want to find out how their iPad works. They've been given an iPad, perhaps passed down from grandchildren, so it's really wonderful what they can do. and how they can connect with their family and their friends, grandchildren all over the world. We're all very conscious of the fact that communities are fragmenting in different ways, aren't they? People are losing contact. But through digital, we can compensate for some of that dislocation. So that's wonderful. So I would commend you to complete that questionnaire online if you can. So if you go to the Carmarthenshire 50 Plus Forum, the website is there. We try and keep it up to date. There are lots of very good resources there. The questionnaire is there for completion. It'll take you through the process. I'd also say that all the speeches that you've heard today, it's a lot to take in. Those speeches will be on the Carmarthenshire 50 Plus website, as are the ones from last year and perhaps even the ones before. So I have to thank in particular Aled over there, who's our technician for today. Aled is responsible for making sure that all of the sound and the video stuff is working, and that those broadcasts will be on the 50 Plus website over the next few weeks. Aled is nodding, so that's wonderful. Yeah. Most of you have already had the Carmarthenshire 50 Plus magazine. I'd like to pay a special tribute to all the contributors, and particularly to one of our former steering group members, John Hobden, who has stepped down, but John almost single-handedly designed and produced that with support from some of the other contributors, but also from the County Council in terms of getting it printed and so on, and translated. Can I also say that the 50 Plus Forum has been working hard on the strategic plan, and I'm very pleased again that some of the themes in our plan have been echoed by the Minister. So one of our purposes, and there are several, is to provide a united voice for older people in Carmarthenshire. Identifying gaps in the provision of services for older people, whether that's libraries or transport or pavements or whatever. We're all conscious of the good things in Carmarthenshire, but how things could be better. So many of you are involved in very actively in your local communities, town councillors, county councillors, and we have some of those people here today, and I'm looking across the room in this direction. Now, just if I can pick up one or two of our guiding principles from the strategy. The equality of older people and their what we're talking about is the equality of older people and their entitlement to respect and dignity. And I'm sure the new Commissioner will be hearing that theme loud and clear across Wales. People want respect and equality and dignity. I think I'll read the other two as well, because they're not very long. Secondly, the right of older people to be treated fairly and equitably, regardless of their age, their gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability. Now, some of us are fairly lucky. We're just old. Okay, we have a gender, that's fine. But if you are challenged in terms of your gender, your disability, your sexual orientation, your ethnicity, life becomes doubly, trebly difficult. So we need to be aware of that and understand. And I'm very pleased that one of our new members of the steering group is Janice Powers, and many of you will have seen her around Carmarthen at this forum in the past with her guide dog. She is blind, so it's wonderful to have someone like that on the steering group who can challenge us from time to time. Are we doing the right thing by people with disabilities? And lastly, and I will finish on this, third guiding principle, the right of older people to live independently as long as possible, ideally in their own home and community, and to receive appropriate and proportionate support as they get older. So that's a real challenge, living independently, living in your community, living with friends and family, not always possible, but having the kind of housing that is appropriate as you move through the generational stages.